Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to UU San Francisco. This is the Sunday Forum, which is a program of the Human Rights Working Group. I am Jeff Peckrell. I am a co-chair of the Human Rights Working Group along with Dolores Perez-Heilbrunn and Melvin Starks, who are here today. And this is the final planned forum for the year. We do these forums from September until June, and then we take June and the rest of June and July and August off. I have a feeling there might be some special programs this summer because the Human Rights Working Group is participating in efforts to raise awareness around the ICE deportations and that whole immigration crisis, which is really starting to get hot here in San Francisco. So it wouldn't surprise me if we have some special programs around that this summer, but this is the last planned forum until September. And I want to tell you about a couple of other things that are coming up in this room at 12:30 today after the church service. We're having another program. We have 3 students from University of San Francisco Law School who are working on the issue of immigration. The description of this is that liberation and American law and disorder. They will explain how anti-immigrant forces intentionally create panic and fear and will present a know your rights description. So basically how to mobilize to stop ICE deportations and things. Legal options will be explained, and they will share ways ordinary citizens can support immigrants during this time of growing immigration instability. The latest court rulings will also be discussed and what they portend for the future of democracy. So please come back at 12:30. There will be lunch here too. I have another announcement about something at City Hall. There's going to be a comment session on the budget, which Mayor Lurie has proposed, and this comment session will be on the 23rd at 10 a.m. in City Hall room 250. And they're urging people to get down there and react to this budget, which there's quite a bit to read here, but some of the cuts look pretty awful, is the bottom line. Okay, I also want to mention that we have a couple of sign-up sheets back there. If you're not receiving emails about these programs, sign the sign-up sheet and you'll start to get those emails. And now we'll have our Ohlone land recognition.
We, the members of the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco, acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the ancestral custodians of the land on which we're located. We pay our respects to the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, past, present, and future. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We recognize that as the original stewards of this land, the Ohlone and other indigenous peoples who live here have understood the interconnectedness of all things and maintained harmony with nature for millennia. We honor them now for their enduring commitment to our Mother Earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolores. We are blessed to have 2 speakers today on the topic of labor. So we have a well-known labor historian and organizer, Bill Shields, who is going to speak first, and then we have an attorney, Jonathan Reichel, who will also be speaking about the efforts of the Trump administration to decimate the public sector unions, which is very, very harmful, obviously, to the labor movement. So,
morning, brothers and sisters, as we say in the labor movement, and now good morning, siblings, to be inclusive. I'm very grateful that you invited me here and us. You may recognize me. I'm an occasional congregant, what might have been called in the old left back in the day, a fellow traveler. I'm also a longtime union activist. For just about 25 years, I ran a labor education program at City College called Labor and Community Studies, where we taught organizing, we taught job rights, we interested students in careers in labor, and we had a chorus, and we also had a writing program. So tried to hit on a lot of different cylinders. I came from a baby boomer family that was blue collar moving up to white collar. My dad was a union shop steward, factory leader, union leader who became a lawyer. This uncle stayed in the mills, steel mills in Cleveland, Ohio, that a relative went up into management. So kind of a mixed bag in terms of class and union relations until I ran into the 60s, and that redirected me to become a social movement activist rather than a corporate lawyer myself, where probably I might have been headed. So anyway, I bring that background. I see Bruce in here, who's a longtime labor movement person. Eric Shackelford here is as well. Susie has union connections. Your reservations manager, and Art Persico. And how many of you have ever been in a union yourself? How many of you know somebody who's been in a union? How many of you think you know a little bit about the labor movement? How many of you have no clue? No clue. Okay. All right, I'm going to present to you an activist congregation. Try to remember who I'm talking with. That this is a progressive congregation. You're going to know a lot of these things, but I'm going to argue that the labor movement, for all of its foibles, should be considered an essential component of any broader social justice movement internationally and in our country. But today, we're going to take a look at public workers, and I'm going to suggest to you that the attack on public workers now is part of, and in the right wing's mind, the last phase of a decades-long attempt to decimate the U.S. labor movement. And Jonathan Reichel, who's going to be our main presenter, he's in the trenches as a federal worker, as a union member, and he's going to talk to us about their fight back and what we might do to help them. Right, Jonathan? Is that right? You're going to tell us what we might do to help fight back? Yeah. So here he is, and he'll be giving autographs after the perform. So, okay, next slide, please. Yes, Jonathan's union is the National Treasury Employees Union, and unions, as you know, have geographic subsections, which are called locals. So I was an organizer, staff person for the Hotel and Restaurant Workers Union, Local 2, when I was there. My mother, by the way, the subject is very dear to me because my mother, after having 9 children, went to work for Social Security, and she became an organizer, member organizer for the American Federation of Government Employees. And at his last international convention, before he died of cancer, the president gave her an award as the member organizer of the year, which was quite wonderful, but a piece of cake really when you've had to manage 9 kids. So anyway, these are maids from the union I used to work for called Unite Here, acronym, and subject is the part played by unions in the quest for social justice. I'm about to take a deep dive very briefly and walk you through some labor history to set up Jonathan for his presentation. And it is about 10 minutes, but he's the main person today. I just love this picture because look how full of life and militants and joy they are. What is the part played by unions in the quest for social justice? Why are working people compelled to form organizations? Why unions? Because in an unjust system, work is hard, harder than it needs to be. Next, please. So in keeping with our land recognition, this is a picture of what the Bay Area might have looked like. It's got here, very rich, very dense, many different peoples here, the Miwok, the Ohlone, and others. Next slide, please. And, when we see these pictures of societies of this type, it's often the men hunting, in this case, fishing, which is important part of the food supply. Next, please. But guess what? Women, except in some, few environments like the Arctic, women provided often more than half the food because the take from the plants was steadier, not easy, but steadier than the take from the hunt. And there were women hunters too. So the California Native people harvested a lot from the acorn. The acorn was kind of the staff of life for them. Many Native American peoples here, rice or wheat, if you will. And here in a village, child rearing, basket making, Native California women are still to this day, those who survive known for their beautiful basketry. You may have seen it along the way. And of course, they're making decisions and they're talking about what's going on because in their society, women had a lot of agency. It's often the case in hunting and gathering, environmental managing societies that women had agency. The Iroquois, the Haudenosaunee, back near the Great Lakes, for instance, the men were the leaders, but the women chose the leaders, as an example. So this abruptly changes when the Spanish come in, then the Mexicans, and set up the mission system. There's been a long debate about whether the native people who worked on the missions, who were really our first farm workers, were slaves or not. And it's pretty well been settled that yes, they were. It was forced labor. And this is a controversial mural. You may have seen it down at Rincon Annex down on Lower Mission Street by the great muralist Anton Refrigier. And the authorities, even then at the end of the 40s, were coming in with McCarthyism. They didn't like this because he had the priest in the back and he foregrounded the native people. Next, please. And they resisted. They ran away, but then they'd send the army over to bring them back. Maybe 300,000 native Californians. Spanish-Mexican period decimated that down to about 150,000. Once the Anglos came in, the gold rush down to 30,000. I once saw a native man speak near here. He was a park ranger. He said, the only reason I'm here is because the lieutenant who was about to kill my ancestors just had a change of heart. So other people were enslaved, of course, as we know, back in the Southeast. Next, please. And I bring this up to you because we may ask why in Northern Europe, for instance, are unions stronger? Do they have stronger social democratic policies? One of the reasons, and they've had their problems, of course, one of the reasons is because the savagery shown to the native people and to the African American enslaved population spilled over to working people who were free labor people, eventually came to be known as white. I'm Irish and Polish. My wife's Italian, but we're white. That's a social construct. So here we see that the farm work in California for a long time, more than many states, if not all, all other states, has been done not by farm owners, we have them, but with large farm owners, growers, by farm workers. And those were first the native people, and then Chinese immigrants, Japanese immigrants, Filipino immigrants, some African-American immigrants, some Okie and Arki immigrants. And here we see that it's been, our food has been coming to us by, provided by people of color for a long time in the state, and they've fought against harsh conditions. Part of the huge union organizing drives of the 30s were attempts to unionize the fields in the 30s, including in California. Next, please. So here we get after World War II, there's a Bracero program bringing people in from Mexico during the war. They're good brazos, their arms. And they again are going to take another crack at organizing. Next. Under the bag of the United Farm Workers Union, which is a very interesting militant, social justice, and Catholic union, all mixed together, often marching behind the banner of La Virgen de Guadalupe. Next, please. So what about when we come to the city? Well, here's early San Francisco, and guess what? We're a port, and so therefore all the industries having to do with transportation and having to do with who does that work are going to be central to the city's economy and social life. Next. You see how quickly we built up? So who's sailing those ships? Who's maintaining those ships? Who's building the parts you need for those ships? Who's loading and unloading the ships? Where are they storing them? Who's taking them and distributing them around the city and around the region? Working people, the port, really key. And so very early, very important to the union history of San Francisco are the port workers, the longshore workers, the sailors, the teamsters, and so on. Next. Here we have another Refrigier mural at Rincon Annex. This was once upon a time a mural that showed on top of the picket signs 8-hour day. Right away in the 1850s, people here, working people here, started fighting for the 8-hour day, a fight that would take until the 1930s to win. Because how long do you think people were working then? Any guesses? 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, often 6 days a week. You're lucky if you got a day and a half off, maybe a day. Well, the right wing was already coming after these murals because Refrigier was a person of the left. And so they made him repaint it, taking out the signs. So you didn't know what the signs stood for. But I'm telling you, and the 8-hour day was won at the state legislature in the 1860s. And immediately the employers ignored it. Go ahead. So the carpenter said, okay, well, we can't, that's how workers try to influence their wages and working conditions through political organizing, political parties, advocacy within existing political parties, and this thing called unions. And sometimes the union was no more than, let's go talk to the boss. He's got a lot of money coming in, times are good, we need a raise. We got the raise, that's the union, let's go get a drink. Times are bad, he's going to cut our wages, we're going to have to, suck it up until times get better again. So it's only at a certain point, later 19th century, that we begin to get intergenerational companies and intergenerational unions as well. Carpenters Local 22 is building a brand new union hall down near Evans and 3rd, even as we speak. Okay, and here, that's probably one of my Irish ancestral peeps coming over here, doing that kind of work, which many Latinos do today, construction work. Next. So just a little, I'm not going wide. This has happened in many different countries, many different sectors. These are young Italian and Jewish women, immigrants in the garment industry who were in the early 20th century, a strong part of rebuilding and growing the American labor movement, including some out here. Okay. Okay, we're now to the modern port. That is the ferry building. You see people who are standing on the street today, day laborers looking for work. That's what it was like for a longshore worker. They had a weak, phony company-controlled union. They had to come down 5, 6 in the morning, stand across from the ferry building for the shape up. And I, the all-powerful supervisor, would choose who would work. And you didn't cash your check at my cousin's bar like I told you to, not you. You are some kind of union agitator. None of us are going to hire you. So people were, and the ones who got hired would work for 24, sometimes 48 hours in a row. Well, other people didn't get any work. So conditions were savage and lots of deaths, lots of hardship, lots of low wages and no control because the union that had been there in the early 1900s had been busted by the employers. In the 1920s was the time of rebuilding. Next. This is the kind of work. Now it's mostly in container cargoes, still hard, still dangerous. A lot more people did this kind of break bulk cargo. Next. But if you thought it was hard already, when we hit the Great Depression, it's even harder. Business is off. People are getting what inadequate relief they have until they elect a huge majority Democratic Congress and a Democratic president and push them to create the New Deal, some social programs that help people get through the Depression better than not. And this is very unusual. I just want to linger for 1 second. As I mentioned earlier, you don't go on strike. You don't take action when times are tough because the boss doesn't have as much money because there's a huge pile of unemployed people waiting right outside the door to take your job. But the 30s were a rare combination of the depth of the Depression and its great length, plus the kind of organizing that people had been doing. There had been a group called the Industrial Workers of the World, the Socialist Party. I know the name is still highly charged, but in the 30s, about 100,000 members nationally, the Communist Party. There were organized leftists in these unions, pushing them to become more militant. And before the 30s, most unions were for more highly skilled workers like that carpenter I showed you. Only about 20% of people had unions in this country because you're white, you're a man, you're native born. You have more social status. The immigrants, the women, people of color, not so much. This decade is the first real breakthrough decade in bringing large numbers of people of color, large number of immigrants, large number of so-called lower skilled workers, because I think all workers are skilled, into the union. This industrial union drive of the 1930s was huge. And it came at a cost. A lot of times when people tell this history, you don't tell the history of the bosses. Well, there's good bosses and there's nice people. There's some nice rich people and so forth. But most of the time, most of them, when it comes to, I'm going to control my business and I'm going to take the profits and use them the way I want to, will do what they need to maintain that power. That's been my study of history, my experience personally. And that includes go out there and beat those strikers. Go out there and throw tear gas down on the Embarcadero. So there was a virtual war down on the Embarcadero from May to July of 1934, a huge waterfront workers' strike. Finally, police killed 2 strikers, a striker and a strike supporter, and the whole city went out a general strike. A general strike is like a revolution. In the 1980s, when I lived in Holly Park, there was an elderly man who lived next to me. He said, Bill, I had a gas station down on the waterfront. And it was the strike committee that told me to whom I could sell gas and not. Emergency vehicles, regular commerce, no. It was huge. This was a hugely transformative moment in the history of civil rights in San Francisco. San Francisco is a progressive liberal city, very important. And they won. They won. They didn't win immediately, but they got pretty much everything they wanted. A union-controlled hiring hall instead of that degrading shape-up. Check this out. When everybody else is fighting for a 40-hour week, they got a 30-hour week, right? And a raise, and they began to bring in people of color, particularly black men, who had been invited into SCAB because the old collaborationist union hadn't cared about them. Harry Bridges, who's the building across the street is named for, the ILW headquarters, International Longshore and Warehouse Union. By the way, the San Francisco Labor Council, for which our daughter is the political director, right across the street. I'm still trying to create an event where some of us from the church go over there and meet them, and some of them come over here and meet us, because people on either side of the street don't really know each other. And victory, they won. And so men of color, eventually women, began coming into this union, began coming into this trade, because Harry Bridges went to black ministers' pulpits, said, don't scab on us, and we'll help you get work after the strike. And the black community took a chance on him, and he delivered, and they won. And a lot of black leadership, black and Latino membership today. And that's their drill team. If you have an event here and you'd like to have maybe Labor Day, we could have the ILW drill team come in and march up and down in the, the hallways or in the sanctuary. They're really very good. Next. This is just a nod back to my home area. This is Detroit. I'm from Cleveland. They occupied the General Motors factory, and they had classes, and they had music, and they won too. And this is as if, just think right now, if all the Uber drivers all of a sudden were unionized and Uber gave them a contract and agreed to bargain with them. In other words, agreed to be a little bit democratic in how they run the company, and Amazon and all those big companies. That's what this was like at that moment. And for a baby boomer, the relative affluence that many of us lived derives a lot from this. My uncle worked for Republic Steel. He was a union shop steward. My uncle Lenny Jankowski. I worked there one summer, but blood had been shed. The police in Chicago shot down Republic Steel strikers in the back. But these guys, hey, we're not going to get shot outside of the factory. We're going to occupy the factory. And they're not going to come in here and try and get rid of us, because that might risk damaging the machinery. They won. This happened in Chinatown. This is a key moment in the development of the civil rights movement for the Chinese community, who had been excluded by white workers, including Irish workers, who came in here and saw the bosses going to China and using them to come in and work for lower wages. And it was true. But you needed to be a visionary to see, well, let's organize with them then. My father said the Irish, back in our Catholic Church, Holy Name Church in Cleveland, the Irish workers and the Polish workers met each other as strikers and strikebreakers on either side of the picket line in 1919, the Great Steel Strike. And they settled into the same Catholic Church and hated each other for generations. And he said, I decided I grew up, got beat up, grown up in a Polish neighborhood, so I couldn't beat him. I joined him. I married your mother, he said. So this is Sue Ko Lee. Back, please. Sue Ko Lee, famous strike of Chinatown workers, Chinese American workers, and they eventually won. And this was against a Chinese employer. And for the first time, the white union said, okay, white garment workers union said, we'll let Chinese in, because there had been this huge labor-led, often anti-Chinese movement here, very ugly part of labor history here. And they said, okay, we'll work with you. And that resource helped them to win. The company closed a year later. The union said, okay, we're going to fight for the right of Chinese women and men to work at Macy's Union Square. They began to break out of the ghetto. And after the war, they'll begin to break out to being able to live in the West Side. Now, about 35% Asian American. That could happen a long time ago. Next. The hotel workers, my old union. There was a virtual hotel general strike in 1937. About 90% of all the big hotels agreed. They're compelled by the strike, which stands up against the way they were compelling poor conditions on their employees. And almost 90% of 50 big hotels and almost 90% of all the restaurants in San Francisco were union. In fact, the restaurant owners had to band together and plead with the union to at least bargain with them, as opposed to just telling them what the wage is going to be. That's how far the pendulum swung on the side of workers. Next. So by the end of the 1930s, United States workers had one massive unionization of the factories, labor law reform, including a ban on most child labor, a minimum wage, 25 cents an hour, but it was a start, and the 8-hour day, finally. And this was extended during the vast industrial buildup of World War II, when there were wage price freeze and controls, and the unions couldn't bargain for more wages, so they started bargaining from the huge profits the companies were making for something called benefits, paid vacations, paid sick leave, paid dental care. It starts really at this point. Next. So, of course, the famous Rosie the Riveter, and there were plenty of black women as part of that. World War II industries, millions go to work, millions join unions. There's a Rosie the Riveter National Park over in Richmond. You can take the ferry boat over there. You can go visit it. It's very moving, very powerful. Next. And this is at the bottom of Mission Street near the Rincon Annex murals that I mentioned, is a sculpture that commemorates the ILWU. You'll see here is the big can, you, not you, the different working conditions. On the other side, I couldn't find a picture of the other side. The other side, you see the things they won, the 30-hour work week and so forth. And by the way, a 30-hour work week for blue-collar workers means they have time to do things. And a group called the Waterfront Writers was created. I was with a group of the Bay Area Labor Theater in the 70s and 80s. We worked with them. They wrote poetry. They wrote novels. There was the famous longshore philosopher, Eric Hoffer, because they had time. Next. Okay, so by 1955, I'm 5 years old, first of the 9 kids. 35% of all US workers, 80 to 90% of the factories had compelled their employers to bargain with them through striking, through agitating, through marching, through putting pressure, through politicians. Like the Democratic governor of Michigan did not call in the troops to clear the strikers out of the occupied auto plants. So to bargain with them over wages, compensation, and working conditions, we say, you're giving workers a voice at work. What a concept. Rainbow Grocery, yes, that's really cool. But how about at General Motors? How about bringing it up to scale? All those hotels downtown. How about all the Safeways, which are union today? So this is a marker. It's a little technical term. Union density is the percentage of workers that have union contracts in any given society. You know, it's in the 50s and 60s in Northern Europe. This is our high point to date. This is our high point so far was this 35% in 1955. Next. But because Roosevelt had to get the votes of the Dixiecrats, where black people couldn't vote, he had to agree to them saying no domestic workers and no agricultural workers covered by these labor laws that are supporting factory worker unionizing. So they were left out. Government workers were left out too, excluded workers. The idea that, well, they can't go on strike because you're striking against the public. But okay, go ahead next. Public sector workers too. And so people begin to fight. These are garbage men, sanitation workers in Memphis. This is the strike where Dr. King had come and where he was assassinated. They kept up with the strike past that great tragedy and they won. And so as you see, it's both simultaneously a civil rights and union moment, and it's a public sector worker organizing moment. So one key part of the 60s social movements then is the fight for union rights for all these excluded workers, farm domestic government. And on the strength of the social movement upsurge of the 60s and the early 70s, which is when I, for instance, came of age, my cohort, and the great, huge union base of private sector stand on those shoulders. Now the public sector takes off because people are demanding that government take care of us. Well, there's a National Welfare Rights Union. You have the right to get the social welfare. They're not going to stop it just because you're black and a single mom. We gave it to the white people in World War II. So people start pushing for government to help them and do right by them. And that means a big expansion of the kind of programs that Trump is trying to kill now, and a big expansion in the number of government workers. And at the federal level, especially, a lot of those are black workers. So a lot of these jobs that Trump is going after at all levels, but particularly at the federal level, that that's a racial injustice move. So farm workers, Cesar Chavez with the head of the United Auto Workers Union, they begin to win contracts in the 60s and 70s, begin to improve conditions out there in the fields. Then we get a succession of Republican governors and some changes in the flow internationally of workers, and they're greatly weakened. And so then they turn to the strategy of legislation. And there have been a lot of laws passed, for heat breaks, breast breaks, portable toilets, getting taken in vehicles to the fields that have seatbelts. A lot of safety and health issues have been addressed. Less pesticides, which helps all of us. Next. And here we have labor and community coming together. Educators' rights are students' rights. Nurses' working conditions are patients' healthcare conditions. So the public sector really gets organized. Here in California, we see in the 60s on into the 70s. My teachers union, it was just an advocacy group. Hello, supervisor, will you talk to our boss? No, now public sector workers won the right to bargain directly. Their boss had to bargain with them. It's a whole different ball game. Next. So I got to wrap this up. Deindustrialization hits, crisis of profitability in big corporations. They hadn't tended to the domestic industry. They're putting so much of the money into the military. And I worked on a line in the steel mills that summer that was from the 1920s. Well, the destroyed steel mills in Germany and Japan were building. So they said, we got to get more money, and you're costing us too much money with all these environmental regulations. So they moved the steel mills from Cleveland and other manufacturing to Houston. They moved them to Mexico. They moved them to Asia. I saw a guy once say, yeah, our industry, we make the bungs they put on metal barrels. It's automate or emigrate, he said. And so we lost, it was hollowed out. Those industrial cities, people who might have been in unions with good political education programs are now isolated online, listening to all those, toxic masculinity kind of presenters. I guess I'll vote for Trump. When men, including people in general, are in a union, and the union has a good political education program, they vote much more liberally and progressively, and they vote. So tax on private sector unions have driven private sector union density in the United States from 35% to under 10%. Until this is reversed, public sector unions at some 25 to 30% density have become a key bulwark of the movement, all of our social justice movements and democracy. So this whole thing I've been talking to you about to this point is to say that this is a historic moment to save what's left, really, of the labor movement and rebuild from there if we can. Next. Okay, worker productivity going up. Compensation keeps up until union rates go down, and then compensation starts to level off and go down. Bargaining power that's lost. Next. Share of income going to the top 10% compared with union membership. Union membership goes down. More and more of the wealth goes to people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, Peter Thiel. Union jobs to low-wage states and countries, automation, the gig economy. This is like 19th century territory now. I said, you're not my employee. I owe you nothing. You have no unemployment compensation. You drive your own car. I'm just an app. I just connect you to a customer. It's a complete scam. And we've tried to, including in progressive states like California, make it such that, no, you're an employee. That's so important. And you see the huge amount of money that gig and companies like Uber and Lyft put into that bill we had a few years ago, excluding them. Go ahead. Almost done, Jonathan. So high profile, this is a quote, union organizing campaigns, attacks on those campaigns have shined a spotlight, but attempts to derail these efforts by corporations are on the rise. So the thing I also want to say is there's a union busting industry on which you spent $400 million a year. You're supposed to have the right to form a union in the Bill Shields company. You start doing it. I call Jeff. He brings in his hit team. We have captive audience meetings on paid time. He leans on each one of you, tells you how you're betraying the company, how the company might have to close if you go union. We fire Art, which is all this is illegal because he's a union activist, but it'll take years to get him some kind of compensation. most of you are scared, you vote against the union. $400 million a year, the ideological component of, clubbing people with a club. Go ahead. So abandoned factories back where I'm from, although there's still a lot of manufacturing, a lot of it is not these huge factories that are union. Next, became union in the 1930s, remember. Confessions of a Union Buster, great book, guy who was from Cleveland, made a career doing this kind of union busting, has since passed away. He is an alcoholic, and as part of his restitution, he wrote this book for all the people that he had hurt. Next. So 9.9% of 2024. So we're holding relatively steady on the numbers, but the percentage is declining. Next. I just want to show one thing here, is that the public sector workforce is about 32% union as of 2023. Okay, next. And American Federation of Government Employees. I think I'm going to skip the, go see them. This is my mother's union. Again, very close to my heart. And if you're from Cleveland with all the racial segregation, racism in that northern city, to see that Black union president giving that award to my Polish American mother was a very moving thing. All right, next. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this just, I'm gonna get done, but this just says there's a lot of federal workers who are unionized as well as state and local. So look at their 320,000 member website. Next. Questions? Okay, I'm going to stop for just a second because I'm what's called a popular educator, which is supposed to be more participatory, but I've just been yapping at you. So any questions or discussion points before we turn it over to our main presenter? There's a lot of exciting organizing going on by young workers. They have a formation called Labor Notes, very militant crew. I recently taught a workshop for them, a labor theater workshop at their Troublemakers School, and they're out there organizing. And a big, like the Communist Party was in the 30s, Democratic Socialists of America is a big part of that. And they're out there organizing all those big non-union companies. So federal unions, crisis and opportunity, that's next. So I would like to thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I want to thank Jonathan, who came in at the very last minute. Let's welcome him, Jonathan Reichel from the National Treasury Employees Union.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. It's really my pleasure to speak with you this morning about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Let's go to the next slide, please, if we could. So I'm a lawyer, so I need to start my presentation with some disclaimers. As always, first, I'm giving this presentation in my personal capacity, and the content of this presentation cannot be attributed to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, any of its divisions, or any part of the federal government. Likewise, the views expressed in this presentation are my own and should not be attributed to the National Treasury Employees Union, Local NTEU 335, or the Federal Unionist Network. Finally, this slideshow is a summary and memory aid for myself. The content of my presentation may vary from what is contained therein. So go ahead to the next slide. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself, about the agency I work for, and the work that we do or did. So again, my name is Jonathan. I'm an enforcement attorney, which means that I investigate and prosecute violations of federal consumer law. I worked for about 5 years in our Washington, D.C. office, and I've been out here in San Francisco for about the last 3.5 years. My practice is national, so although I'm here in San Francisco, my cases are across the country. I work at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. For those folks who don't know what we do at the Bureau, we were an agency created after the financial crisis of almost 20 years ago now, initiated by the Dodd-Frank Act in response to what we saw in the financial crisis and the need for a consumer-facing financial protection institution within the federal government. The Bureau does a number of things. It supervises banks. It puts out research reports. It proposes rules and regulations. It processes millions of consumer complaints about financial institutions. and it maintains offices focused on the financial needs of students, veterans, older Americans, women, and minorities. Um, and of course, we also do the things that I do, which is sue banks and their friends when they do bad things, something I'm very proud of, and the work that my colleagues have done. We are a highly skilled workforce, and we are all dedicated to American consumers and to fulfilling our role within the financial system. Um, I want to talk briefly about union activity at the Bureau and how the activities of the union have really improved the Bureau's work and how we serve the American people. So, as I said, we are members of the National Treasury Employees Union. They represent our bargaining unit at the CFPB, which has about 1,400 employees. The Bureau is a relatively small um, agency. We have all told close to 1,800 folks. So this would be with management and other folks that aren't in the collective bargaining union. And as a group, we've returned over $23 billion to American consumers in the last 15 years. Um, so NTEU has been our union for the entirety of the existence of the Bureau. As the name implies, they were first involved in unionizing and representing employees at the Treasury Department. So this includes Treasury employees, but also IRS agents and the people who take your phone calls if you call in because your taxes are all messed up. The union has since expanded. Not only does it represent the Bureau, but it also now represents a lot of the attorneys at the FTC, so the Federal Trade Commission, but also does things like Customs and Border Patrol and other agencies that aren't necessarily tied to monitoring either the federal fiscal service or the general financial marketplace. So what does the union do for the workers at the CFPB? Well, it negotiates and enforces our collective bargaining agreements. So these are the contracts that last about 4 to 5 years that lay out all of the aspects of our employment, from compensation to workplace rules to grievance procedures. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. So they also handle workplace grievances. This is on an individual level. So if I think I'm being treated unfairly by my supervisors, then the union has representation for me or any of my coworkers, as we may want to negotiate or deal with management and how they're treating us as workers. And they also do then kind of employee-wide grievances, so making sure that we have all of the tools that we need to do our jobs, to make sure that the procedures and processes that we have to go through to get things like travel reimbursements or other materials that we need are easy and don't burden us too much. The union also provides mutual aid. So during the last few months, as our various colleagues have been fired or have suffered other financial burdens due to the actions of the Trump administration, we have banded together and provided financial support to other folks in the union. That's ongoing and something that will become more important down the road as we see additional actions taken against public sector employees. So I said earlier that I think that union activity advances the broader goals of the agency and makes the Bureau better for its employees, but also for the American people. One of the things that the union worked hard on over the last 4 to 5 years was ensuring that the Bureau had an equitable pay structure and addressed issues of disparities in pay across gender and race that existed in the Bureau. Although the Bureau likes to think of itself as a 21st century institution and really tries to be as inclusive as possible. Like any human endeavor, it in its kind of work day-to-day workings created a lot of inequalities, and the union worked very hard to ensure that those inequalities were met, that everybody worked at the bureau felt included and felt that they were being more justly dealt with and compensated for their work. The union has also pushed for a number of LGBTQ plus workplace protections, so ensuring that the bathrooms at the bureau are gender neutral, to ensure that accommodations are made for folks who are expressing different gender identities, making sure that on top of general federal anti-discrimination laws, that our collective bargaining agreement included provisions to ensure that folks would not be unfairly treated because of any of their sexual or gender identities. And then finally, the union has been bankrolling, to put it in pretty stark terms, our fight against the Trump administration and the defunding of the Bureau. So, beginning in February of this year, actions were taken by the Trump administration to fire the vast majority, over 90% of the Bureau employees, and to shut down the activities of the Bureau. So, this is now included dismissing over 20 lawsuits that we'd filed, working with the companies that we had prosecuted to undo the settlement agreements that we came to, and in some cases trying to undo court-approved settlement agreements. So really going back and undoing a lot of the work that we've been putting our hearts and souls into for the last 15 years, taking down guidance, and basically giving a green light to industry to kind of do whatever they want in the consumer financial space. So we have an ongoing lawsuit. It's in Washington, D.C. It has thankfully led to our jobs being preserved. But unfortunately, the work that we do is really not continuing. And so kind of at a standstill, and it's really disappointing. I love my job. My colleagues really love our jobs. We think we do great work for the American people, and what we want to do is just get back to that work. But thankfully, we've had the union, and my union dues go to paying some great lawyers who are continuing these challenges now that it's up on appeal, and hopefully will continue to work for, in the first case, the employees, but also the American people who I think really need the services that we provide. Let's go to the next slide. So, say the CFPB, we have a merchandise shop if you want to see some great swag that also goes to help our union members. Please feel free to visit cfpbunion.shop and pick yourself up a t-shirt or a bumper sticker or anything else. We would appreciate it. Go ahead to the next slide. So what's happening at the Bureau is not unique. There have been massive attempts to cull the federal workforce and to really scale back the scope of what the federal workforce can do for the American people. And one of the things that this has led to are a group of active union folks from across the federal government to try to start working together to address not only those things that are particular to their own work or their own agency, but to federal workers across the board. And that network is called FUN, or the Federal Unionist Network. And it aims to bring together folks that do very different things, but who want a place where they can have their voice heard and have an avenue to really advocate for federal workers as a whole. So, in our fun activities, you have folks like me, lawyers that do financial services. Some of the other folks are social workers at the Veterans Administration, the folks that try to advocate for fair workplaces at the National Labor Relations Board, folks from the Department of the Interior, the National Park Service. And this is an opportunity for us to realize the strength that we have as federal workers, realize the strength that we have as members of a union, and have a space where we can advocate in a more active and I think in a more progressive and maybe even aggressive way. And the reason why this is important in part is because our unions, so for me, NTEU, represent a broad variety of federal workers. And so one of the groups of workers that NTEU represents are workers at Customs and Border Patrol. So some folks that are involved in activities that a lot of us personally are not in agreement with. But the union's job is to represent workers. And I do believe that all workers, whether or not they're doing jobs that I disagree with personally, as workers deserve union representation. So my union would not be an avenue to, say, protest ICE, because part of what my union does is represent workers that are adjacent to those activities or workers who are participating in that. As much as it's bad, I understand that the union needs to represent those folks. So fun is a way that I can work with fellow union members towards more socially oriented goals. So that's one of the reasons why it's really important to have this new type of federal worker union network. Next slide, please. So what does FUN do? As I said, connect across unions, agencies, and workplaces, share learning, resources, support, and solidarity. One of the things that has been really interesting to see is that our union at the CFPB has had incredibly hard fights around those things that I said earlier. So equitable pay, protections for our LGBTQ plus fellow workers that a lot of other unions haven't had to deal with. They've had much easier compensation, kind of negotiations. Some of them haven't bitten off more of these extra protections. And so we're able to share kind of on the ground, like bargaining struggles. It was kind of ironic under our last Biden appointee director, so Rohit Chopra, who I agree with philosophically, was very hard on union representation. And we battled with him on our compensation package and these protections that we had. But that was really kind of a crucible in which our union really came together, learned how to organize, learned how to advocate to the public, learned how to protest. We brought out, the inflatable rat that you'll see at construction sites. We put that out in front of a federal government building, to protest the fact that they weren't negotiating in good faith with us. Those are experiences that we can bring to other people who are now in a position where they have to really advocate for their jobs and advocate for themselves. And then there are folks in other agencies that have a real on-the-ground support and networks within the community that the Bureau just doesn't have. I literally sit up in an office tower on a day-to-day basis and, work at a desk. The people that go out and say work for the VA and are interfacing with people every day are much better advocates for kind of in-person, on-the-ground organization. Next slide, please. So the last few months have been a real struggle for us as federal workers, but we have started the process of a mass backlash and pressure against these actions against the federal government because we believe that we have, the right case. We believe that the people in America do support the work we do. but it's all about making our voices heard and winning that narrative. And so fun has been a primary mover of any time you see on social media or in traditional media, federal workers, whether it be personal stories of the work that we do or any coverage of protests or actions that we're taking, or just putting literature and other resources out into the public so that there's really this ability to counter the narrative that's coming from the Trump administration about why they are doing these things to the federal workers. Next slide, please. So we have also tried to be creative in the things that we do. On Mondays, there's a group of us who protest in front of the Tesla dealership. There is we are at just about any of the kind of larger rallies. So whether it was the May Day protests or the recent No Kings protests, there's a presence there of these federal unions, and trying again to tell our story and get the message out about the impact to both our lives, but then the people that we serve as well. Next slide, please. So these are some of the things that we have done across the country. Again, these are about organizing both workers, but also the general public in a way I don't think that federal workers have ever or have not in a long time really reached out to do. So trying to create communities around the idea of federal work and work for the public good, and also as a means to then push back against some of the policy choices of the Trump administration. Next slide, please. And so one of the future activities that we're doing, and one of the ways in which we think that fun can really have a unique impact in, I think, what its members believe is a very important pushback against the activities of ICE and the disruptions and awful things that are being done to our communities. A lot of ICE and the related federal entities share buildings with other federal agencies. And so you can imagine, federal building downtown, many floors, and ICE may occupy one or two of those floors, but then you've got maybe the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Education, or Department of Energy, or lots of different places where the workers themselves are against the actions of ICE, but also where we see that we need to have the participation of the public in our work. So one of the things that I do as a civil prosecutor is I interview consumers. And so an important part of building a case is to get that narrative from a consumer. And so I'll conduct consumer interviews. I'll have those folks come to my office to talk to me about their experiences. This is a key piece of evidence. If you are a National Labor Relations Board employee, you may want to have vulnerable employees come to the office to provide you with information. The public input is very important for the work that we do. If the public feels uncomfortable, if they feel threatened, if they feel they are not welcome at a federal building, our work can't be done. And we can't serve the people that we are called to serve. So that is the kind of genesis of this type of action, which is bringing together federal workers to say that the actions of ICE and their tactics are impacting other federal work and are making it more difficult for our work to be done because of the actions they're taking. It's a small little bit in a larger fight, but I think it brings a voice and it brings a perspective that we hope will have some amount of pushback against what we think is a larger social problem. I think that's all I have prepared. So kind covered a lot of things. Happy to take any questions. And I really appreciate your time and having me here.
Thank you, Jonathan. We don't have time for a lot of questions today, and we have a couple of announcements that we're going to repeat from the beginning. But a couple of questions. You mentioned that your union represents the Border Patrol workers. Are the ICE workers unionized? And could the union be pressured to get them to behave more lawfully, like not being masked and wearing badges, announcing themselves, and not this Gestapo-like tactics they are using? Could the union have anything positive to do on that?
So I'm fairly certain that ICE is likely unionized, in the same way that a local police force is unionized. But they tend to have more particular. ICE in itself is not a part of our union, although its union is in the AFL-CIO, which we are a part of as well. So there are connections. Whether or not their union could pressure them, potentially yes, right? I think unions definitely try to inculcate a culture of service and understand that the kind of broader long-term goals of an agency are better suited if they're actually serving the people. Whether or not their union is inclined to do that, I don't know, but anecdotally, I would say no. In the same way that the unions that represent police officers or other law enforcement agencies usually tend to mirror the cultures that exist, as opposed to having a influence on them in any way.
Okay. Here are two questions that are kind of similar. Some people regard the Trump government administration as more than just ultra conservative, but actually as fascist, meaning that it can't be defeated in the traditional democratic way, but must be driven out of power by mass action. What is your view on that? And the other question was, some people say that dismantling the capitalist system is the only way of truly empowering workers.
Wow. So those are big questions. So on the first front, so I think that whether or not the ultimate kind of rejection of Trumpism is something that is larger than our normal kind of tools that we have. So I think our tools currently are through the legal system, like our union is doing, so challenging Trump's actions through lawsuits. There's also, again, future voting activities that may occur. And I think that those are things that we should not lose sight of. I'm not a nihilist. I am also a lawyer. And so I do continue to believe that there is a position for the legal system and for our normal activities to have a positive change. It is my sincere hope that we do not have to resort to things more than that to ensure that we have continued democratic process and that we have a constitutional form of government. But I cannot predict the future. The second part about capitalism. I think that what I would say is that it is my desire in the work that I do and from me personally that we would have a government that's more focused on the needs of people. And I think that the work that we were able to do at the Bureau was one step of that. Whether or not having more government work that really works for the needs of people as opposed to the already well taken care of. I would hope that there is a future where we can continue to have more of our shared resources focused on improving the lives of everyone. If that's socialism, if that's anti-capitalism, I leave that for another time. But I do really think that part of what something like FUN can do is allow the workers at the various federal agencies to pressure, hopefully, a more receptive administration at some point to really focus the work of those agencies on people and improving their lives.
Thank you. We'll wrap up with two questions that relate to unionism and labor in Europe, which is something you commented on in your presentation, Bill. Someone asked about in France, for example, why are the unions stronger than in the US? And the other question is about in Germany, they have I think it might be called cooperatives, where the workers are on the boards of the company and help make the decisions. And so is there any prospect for that kind of thing taking off in the US?
France actually has a pretty low union density, but what they do have is a rich history of revolutionary upsurges, generation after generation, and they've been able to create a high level of government support for workers' rights. So they have more agency with the government than we do here for various reasons. I would say it's that long and rich history. So, 5 weeks paid vacation and so forth, you get things like that. It's interesting, an odd case in Northern Europe where you have some of those similar programs, the union density is higher. Germany, it's a co-management strategy. Remember, before the Nazis took over, people thought Germany was the place where the next socialist revolution was going to happen. They had a communist party, they had a socialist party. After the war, even in the West, they had some revival of that. And for instance, Volkswagen coming over here, we're all union over there. What's going on with it over here? So the history of the workers struggling in those countries, not having to deal with the legacy of slavery or indigenous people's lands being stolen, and their history of struggle, including overcoming eventually fascism, I think have a lot to do with that.
Thank you, Bill. I'll have Art come up in a minute and do another announcement about the comment period for the city budget. But first, I just want to remind you that we're having another program in this room at 12:30. We have 3 students coming from University of San Francisco Law School who will be talking about immigration, working against ICE and deportations and things like that. So please come back at 12:30 and there will be lunch too. All right. And Art, please come up and tell us about the budget.
So the city budget is being negotiated right now before our very eyes. And tomorrow's been designated public comment day. So if you go to City Hall, room 250, where the board meets tomorrow, you'll have a chance to give your input. And I have a little guidance here from the public coalition. Gosh, I can't remember the name now. It's a coalition of people who want to save services. So I'll have these at the door.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. This is the last scheduled forum until September. So enjoy your summer.